Stanford University.
Okay, well, welcome to Lecture 17, Stanford CS193P, Winter 2015. Today our topics are internationalization and localization. That's making your application so you can ship it all around the world in different languages. And then also kind of a minor topic, settings, which is a way that you can add a little bit of UI to the general settings application on the phone. And I'm going to have demos for both of these things. All right, so let's talk about internationalization and localization. Those are actually two different things. Okay, internationalization, sometimes called I-18N, because 18 letters in there between the I and the N. That's the process of making your application localizable. And then localization is the process of actually translating it to another language. So internationalization, that's work that you do as the developer. Okay, you have to take your app and do some things to it. Not a lot, but some little bit of things. To make all the strings that you have in there be pulled out or pullable out of there so that a translator can translate all of them. And then there's a little bit of formatting as well. Certain things, numbers, dates, etc., look different in different languages, so you have to be able to do that. And then localization is a process that a localization company usually does. Someone else does that, someone who's fluent in both languages. Maybe even someone who has a little bit of domain knowledge about what your application does. So if it's a social networking app, they are familiar with other social networking apps, so they kind of know what various words and phrases would be in a UI like that. And so this is kind of a two-step process. And so you're always working on adding new features and internationalizing those features. And the localizer is pretty much kind of always getting a dump of the latest strings from you, and they are translating them and sending them back to you, and you're checking to see if it looks okay in the UI. And you're going back and forth. So it's an iterative process back and forth between you as the internationalizer and the localizer, which is usually some third-party company. There's plenty of companies out there that do it. So let's talk about your side of it first, the internationalization part. And there's really two places that you have strings in your code, strings meaning text that is going to appear in the UI. One is in your storyboard, a lot of strings in there, labels and all that stuff. And for storyboards, the way we do internationalization there is Xcode knows how to reach in there and grab all those strings and pull them out in a way that you can give to a localizer. And then we use auto layout to make sure everything looks nice when these strings come back, because these strings might be shorter or longer. And so auto layout is an extremely important part of internationalization. Okay, it's just one word, auto layout, but it encompasses a lot of the work that you have to do because you have to build your UI to be able to deal with these different length strings. So that's the first part. Now, the way you get these strings out of the storyboard, the very first thing you need to do is, before you do any internationalization, is register localizable languages, languages that you want your app to be able to ship in. Now, this isn't something you have to do up front and pick them all and you're done. You can always add a new language along the way. But when you add a new language, it's automatically, the first time you add a new language, it's automatically going to make your storyboards so that their strings can be pulled out. Okay, this is super easy to do. You're just going to click on your project. And when you click on your project, you're actually going to want the project, not the target. Sometimes when you click on the project in the very upper left of the navigator, it's going to be selecting the target, which is that thing that says auto layout in the second column, the second auto layout down. So you want the top one, which is your actual project. And when you do, you're going to have two tabs across the top, info and build settings. You see those? And you want to be in the info tab, and you'll see about halfway down or towards the bottom there, it says localizations. And there's actually just a list there of languages. So here, my app is going to be localizable into Chinese, simplified and traditional, also into French and Japanese. Okay, so you just keep hitting plus button there. It's just going to ask what language you want to add, and you add them. Okay? Now, you're going to see why this is important later. Now, once you do this, the storyboards, if you look in the navigator, your storyboard, it's going to show all these localizations, right? It's going to have a list of all the localizations if you expand the little storyboard. And also, if you inspect the storyboard in the file inspector, which is the leftmost tab in the utilities column there, if you have a storyboard selected, it's going to show you the localizations there too. And so that's a good way to just double check, oh yeah, I've got all the localizations for all these languages, this is what I expect. You usually don't have to manipulate these two things in any way. It's just there. Usually you'll have it closed up. You'll have the little triangle pressed there by the storyboard and it'll close. You won't even see these things. But that's just to show you what's happening when you do that. So there are other strings in your app, though, besides those storyboard things in labels and stuff. There are literal strings that in your code you put into the UI. And the way you localize those is by calling this function NSLocalizedString. Okay, very, very important function. Every single literal string that's ever going to appear in the UI needs to be wrapped in a call to NSLocalizedString. So the arguments to this thing are, the first thing is the key. Basically, this is the thing that uniquely identifies this string. Okay, and this is usually the thing that you want to put on screen in the language of the developer. Okay, so if English is your language, then this would be in English. If you're, developing an application in Czechoslovakia and Czech is your language, then this string would be in Czech. Okay, or whatever. Is that language? Czech? I think so. So that's what usually this is, but it wouldn't necessarily be that because you might have the same word appear two places in the UI and actually possibly have different translations because they might mean slightly different things. So this key might not necessarily be that. If it's not, then the value option, okay, see the third one, or actually fourth one there, value, that's the thing that it will use if it can't find this thing. The translator doesn't translate this key. Okay? Now the table name and the bundle, that's a way of kind of organizing these localized strings into groups. You can put them in little tables. The bundle thing is more for if you're localizing maybe a framework versus your app. We'll talk about those two arguments in a second here. And then the last argument, comment, super important. This is a comment that goes to the translator. So this tells the translator, this is the context of this. Now, the translator, when they're doing the storyboard, they see your storyboard because you're going to send them your storyboard as well. So they're going to see the context. Oh, this is a label for a field. I get it. But here, these strings are in your code. And so they have no idea where this thing's going to pop in the UI. So you need to give very good comments here to localize. This is the title of an alert that comes up when this bad thing happens because the user did this or whatever, so that they know what the best translation of that word to put up is. So NSLocalizedString, you pass these arguments, and it gives you back a string. And the string it gives you back will either be, if there's no translation, the value there, or the key itself if there's no value, or it's going to be the translated string that came back from the localizer. Okay? And then you're going to use that string. You can put it in the UI. So you want to wrap every literal string in this. Now, most of the time, the table name and bundle are defaulted. The table name is just going to be localizable, which is where most of you put all your strings actually in a table called localizable. And the bundle is going to be your main bundle. That means your app. Okay? Now, we haven't talked much about bundles, but when you have frameworks and other things, you can have other bundles of code in your app, and they might have their own bundles of strings, but I'm not going to really talk about that. I'm just going to say that most of the time, you're just going to call this version of NSLocalizedString that only has the key and a comment. Okay? Because it's going to use the key as the value if there's no translation, and you've got to have that comment to the translator. Okay? So that's 90% of the time, you're just going to put NSLocalizedString, comment, colon, around your literal strings. And that's it. That's all you need to do to get all those little strings to be translatable. All right? Now, if you use a format string, so this format string like this, the result is %G, or the result is %D, okay? So you're using a format string. You're going to want to use this string class method called localizedStringWithFormat to create a string from it. So, it takes var args at the end for all the %Ds or %Gs or whatever's in the string. And you would want that format string to also be NSLocalizedString, okay, because the words in there, the result is, those need to be translated as well. But the reason you want to use this localized string with format is because numbers are not always displayed the same in different languages, and so you want to give this system a chance to display any %Gs or %Ds properly in there. You're actually not even going to use this that much because you're going to use a number formatter, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And the number formatter does an even more powerful job of making sure the number looks good. If you have multiple percent things in there, percent %D, percent %G, a lot of them, the localizer is able to specify the order because as you can imagine in some languages the words might come in a little different order just because of the way phrasing works in a language, and they are able to do that when they translate, so no worries there. All right, so that's strings. Strings in your storyboard, strings in your literal strings in your code. Now let's talk about formatters. So formatters work based on a locale. So there's really two parts of what makes something localized. One is the language, you know, Japanese or French or whatever, but the other is the locale. And the locale is where in the world you are, essentially. So your language might be Spanish, but maybe you're in Mexico, or maybe you're in Spain, or some other part of the world that speaks Spanish, okay? So you would have a different locale, Mexico or Spain, than your language, which might be Spanish, okay? So the formatters are going to format things, numbers and dates and stuff, currencies, based on your locale, okay? And so what kind of formatters are there? Well, we've already seen number formatter. Actually, we saw it the very first day of this class. Number formatter knows how to take a number and turn it into a string. And we didn't really worry about locale when we used it early in the quarter. It was a little advanced topic at that time, but it was using the locale. Even though we weren't worrying about it, it was using it. And this number formatter also be used for formatting currencies, okay, local currencies. And then dates is another one. Dates are displayed myriad different ways across the globe. So you definitely need to use a date formatter if you're going to put any kind of date in your UI. There's also date components formatter. So date components are like the day of the week, the month. Okay, those also are displayed differently across the world. And there's even kind of some fringe formatters you wouldn't think about, but you need to, like byte count formatters, okay? So if you want to say 350 kilobytes left of 2 gigabytes, okay, those numbers look a little different in different languages. You can't just put the number in there and put KB after it and expect that to be kilobytes. It's not necessarily going to be right. So the byte count formatter can help you with that. And then in MapKit, there's a distance formatter. So you can specify here's the distance between two places, because that also needs to be localized. HealthKit also has a number of things like energy, you know, calories used, those kinds of things. Some of those are different in different locales. So anytime you're going to put a number or a date on screen, you're going to want to see if there's a proper formatter to format this thing. Okay? So how do formatters work? Let's look at a couple of them. So NS number formatter. Now, NS number formatter, a lot of API there. You're really going to want to check out the documentation. But I'm going to look at two most basic cases. One is just displaying a number. So you create an NS number formatter like we did in the calculator. Then you set the style of the number. So for example, decimal style or currency style. There's also a style, even spell out style, that will spell the number out. 3,000, T-H-R-E-E-T-H-O-U-S-A-N-D, right? It'll set it out as words in the local language. So there's a few styles in there. Then you can set other things about the formatter, how many digits you want before and after the decimal point, how you want rounding to happen, all that kind of stuff. Set that all up, and then you just call formatter string to number, string for number. From number, string from number. You give it the number you want, and it will return to you a string that uses all those attributes that you set up and be proper for the locale you're in. Okay? So that's that way. And of course, think about the other way. If you're going to ask the user for a number, then you better use a number formatter to parse that number into a number from a string. And that's because, as you know, some parts of the world, the decimal separator is actually a comma. So if they type 3,2 and you don't use the formatter, you're going to look at that and say, oh, they want, what do they want, 3? Or that's just not even a valid number, right? But if they type 3,2 and their locale is someplace where that's the way numbers are expressed, then it's going to give you 3.2 back out of it, okay? So displaying and parsing numbers, main job of NS number formatter, but there's a lot more in there. So you definitely want to familiarize yourself with that class. On the date side, okay, formatting dates, very complicated. Okay, how we as humans represent dates, we don't do it in a simple way, unfortunately. Luckily, there's some built-in, pretty simple styles for showing numbers: short style, medium style, long style, full style. And hopefully, those will do what you want. Because if you can use one of those, then the way to do it is you just create an NS date formatter, you set the time style and the date style to be one of these kind of styles, and then you just get your string from date. And now you'll have a string you can put in the UI that'll be fully localized in the local language and in the right locale. Okay? UI image, how about images? Because, you know, some street signs or other things like that might look different in another language. And there's a couple of ways to do that. If you put the JPEGs or the PNGs directly in your project, in other words, you don't put them in the images.xc assets thing, then actually those can become localizable files. And you just click on them, go to the file inspector and say, make this localizable. And you can have a different version for every language that you want. But maybe a better way to do it is put them in your XC assets, put all the images from all the languages, and give them names that you can then look up using NS-localized string. Okay? And then your translators can translate the name of stop sign to, you know, French stop sign or something like that, and then that'll be the name in the image SC assets. And then you can use some naming convention to group them or whatever you want to do, but that's probably a little bit better way to do it, because then your translator has a little more control of it. Now, you'll have to coordinate with your translator to make sure you name the images in your XC assets to match what they've translated them to, but still, pretty straightforward way of doing that. Okay, so congratulations, you've done all those things, right? You did the storyboards, you added the languages, you used NS localized string, you put the formatters in there. Now your app is localizable, and now you want to localize it, okay? How do you do that? Could not be simpler. You just go to the project again, the same place that you added the languages, and from the editor menu, you just say export for localization. And it will export all the languages. You can actually select which ones you want, but it'll export all your languages in a format called XLIF, okay, which is this international file format for translators. Okay, they have tools, translators have tools that read XLIF files and let them translate it, and then they press, you know, send or whatever, and it generates an XLIF with the translations in it. So this is kind of the, you know, industry standard communication mechanism between developers and translators. And so export localization will generate them all. And then your translator will use their tool, translate it, give you an XLIF file back, and you will then, in that same place, say import localizations. Okay? You can only import one XLIF at a time. A single XLIF can have multiple translations from multiple languages, by the way. And your translator, if they're doing 10 languages for you, they might give you one XLIF with all the languages in there. But anyway, you do import localizations, and it will import it into your project. And what's really cool then is if you then change some things and export again, all of their translations will get exported, so that you can just keep going back and forth, import, export, and the translator is doing the opposite. They're importing what you send, they translate it, they send it out. When you send something new, it has all the old work they did, because export keeps that, okay? So it's really super simple system. It's totally built for that iterative process. Really, it's well designed. I think this is new for iOS 8. They did a great job of this, okay? So it's just import, export, and that's all it takes. Okay? Once you have a localization back, you can preview it in two different places. One, you can preview it in Xcode, and I actually showed you this earlier in the quarter. There's that little preview pane on the right, and you can preview it. And in the lower right-hand corner of the preview pane, it actually has all the languages that you have translations for. You can just pick it, boom, right there in Xcode, it'll show you. Now, that's only going to show you your static storyboard, though. It's not showing your app running. You're not going to see any of your NS localized strings in there. You're only going to see the translations that were made to something in a storyboard. And yeah, notice there's that nice little double-length pseudo language. That's a good way to make everything really long and make sure everything's fitting. Maybe there's places in your auto layout you need to make more room, something like that. So that's kind of cool. It's not real language, just doubles the length of every string, but it's kind of cool. The other way, and this is mostly the way you're going to test your app, is you want to run it using the translations. Now, it would be a pain in the neck if every time you wanted to run in Arabic, you had to go on your device or your simulator, go over here to, actually here, let's put this up here and I'll show you. Okay, so here's my device. So if I had to go to settings and go to, I think it's under general, and then go to, where is it? It's like language and region. and then go over here to my iPhone language and go find Arabic in here. If I had to do that for all the 10 languages, I would just be going crazy doing that. So luckily, you don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is create a scheme, okay, a run scheme for your app that sets the language. So the way you create a scheme, in the upper left-hand corner of Xcode where you click Run, right now you've only ever see it say the name of your app. But you can actually hold down on that, and there'll be a little menu, and you can say Edit Scheme. And Edit Scheme will bring up this thing that you see there, the big window, and it's going to say, okay, what are the settings you want when you build, when you run, when you test, when you profile this app, when you're static analyzing, etc. And in the run section, there you can see that there's application language and application region. So you can set those to French or maybe Spanish and Mexico if you want as the locale. And then it will make a new entry. Okay, first of all, you duplicate an existing scheme. You see that lower left, duplicate an existing scheme. Then you set all these things and save it, and now you have two schemes. The original one that doesn't have the language set and the duplicated one. Okay, that you've set the language in. Now, if you want to run in that other language, like French, you just hit that pop-up, pick French, hit Run. Okay, and it's going to run using that language in locale. It's really cool, fast way. You can check 10 languages really quick. You added a new feature or new translation came back in, you just click Run, check it out. Okay, click Run, check it out, back and forth. Okay, so that's how you preview a localization at runtime. Okay, and I'll show that in the demo. There's also this little localization debugging switch you see in there, and that's going to do a couple of things. One thing is unlocalized strings from your storyboards will show up in all caps in your UI. So that's nice. Also, things that were not localized will spit something out on the console saying, this string unlocalized. Okay? So when you're getting something back from the localizer, you want to make sure they didn't make any mistakes, although the import is going to find the mistakes. I'll show you that too in the demo. But if there's something else in there, you'll be able to see it with this localization debugging on. Okay? And that's it. Okay? So all you got to do is auto layout, get your localized strings in there, use formatters properly, and you'll be internationalizable. And then it's just a question, go hire your localizer. Back and forth with the xlifs. All right, so let me show you what this looks like. Here, we're going to localize auto layout. Okay, do you remember this app back when we were doing auto layout? Looks like this. So we're going to localize this to a number of different languages. And I added one feature to this actually, which is this little guy right here, last login. So I just made it when you log in, it puts a last login date in here because that's going to let us talk about date formatters and number formatters, things like that in here. But otherwise, it works exactly the same as it always is. We type a username and password, we hit login, we can do change security, and it'll change this word right here, and that's it. So what do we need to do if we want to make this localizable? Well, the first thing we want to do is go up to our project up here. And again, you want to be careful here not to have the target selected. You actually want the project selected, okay? Target, project. So if you have the project selected, you're going to have info and build settings. And so let's create some localizations. You see it down here, localizations. We don't have any currently. It just says English. So I'm going to create some. Yeah, let's do French. That's a good one. And it's saying here, what do you want to make localizable? And yes, my storyboard. And also that launch screen, which we really haven't talked about in this class. The launch screen, by the way, is just this thing that pops up briefly while your app is getting up and running. You've probably seen that. You can edit it and put an image there or something like that. But that's something that might want to be localizable if it has text or something on it. So we'll go ahead and leave that. So there's French. Let's do Chinese. Let's do traditional also. Let's do, I don't know, how about something Arabic? How about is a good one? How about Japanese? Yeah, it's Japanese. Okay, so I'm just adding a bunch of languages here. And when I now go here to this editor menu and say export for localization, it's going to say, where do you want to put them? So I have a directory here called my L10N, my localization one. And I have this folder called to localizer. Okay, I don't have anything in there right now. So we're going to put our auto layout stuff in there. Here you see it's asking what languages you want to generate these xlifs for. So I'm going to hit save, and it's going to generate xlifs, which we're going to go look at for all of these things. Okay, so here's all the files that are going to my localizer. I'm going to send these to my localizer. So let's look at one. It really doesn't matter because nothing's been localized yet. But here we go. See, storyboard. Here's all the strings. You recognize these strings: company, last login, the login button, username, name, password, the change security button. Those are all the strings that it extracted from the storyboard. Okay, and I send these off to my localizer, and they go work on them, and then we get some back. So, okay, look, they just came back from the localizer. Here they are. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Japanese one. So here's the Japanese one right here. What does this look like? So the localizer has put localizations for each of these things into this xlif. Now, they didn't edit it here in TextEdit. They have a tool that lets them do that. And so let's go ahead and import that. So we go here, and we're going to import this localization for Japanese from the localizer, Japanese. Okay. Oh, there's a problem. Okay. Now, if there's no problem, this just loads up, and you're good to go. But here there's a problem, and when there's a problem, it shows you in detail what the problems are. So here it says there's incoming translation for one of the things in IB that was not done, and you can see it right here, no translation. So they didn't translate the word company. Now, luckily, company never actually appears in our UI. That's just like the little thing where, you know, Madison Bumgarner, and it was world champion San Francisco Giants. So company always gets replaced with whatever the logged in user's company is, so we're okay. But you can see it's showing all the other translations, and those look good, right? So this one, this one, this one. It's showing those translations. So this will only appear if you've got something where your translation company failed in their translation. In this case, it's okay. So I'm going to accept this and import it. Okay, now I can actually go to my storyboard here, and without even running my app, okay, I can make a second window here and go down to preview. Okay, so let's preview what our main storyboard is going to look like. Of course, our S is cut off because if you'll remember from the auto layout demo, we put that in code. We put a constraint for the aspect ratio, so that's in code, so that's not here. So here's what it looks like in English right down here. And if I go up here and say, well, tell me what this looks like in Japanese, then it will use those translations from Japanese. Now, notice company is in all caps. That's because that was not translated. Notice that they translated the word name to be the same. If we look at the Japanese translation, and we look at what they did for name, which is right here, they said, oh, well, there's just no word in Japanese for that part of the UI, so we're just going to leave it in English. Okay, they have that option to do that, but you might say, I don't want that, and so you can easily see that here. Okay, especially with a language like Japanese versus some Western script language like English, you can see quickly, oh, whoa, whoops, that's not there. Okay, so that's great, and if we run our app, we could run it in Japanese as well. And so let's do that. Let's do this edit scheme thing. So you see, I'm just taking this thing up here that normally it's always saying auto layout, and I'm going to say edit scheme. And when I edit its scheme, I can edit scheme for lots of different things, building, et cetera, but I want it for running. I want to edit the scheme for running. And I'm going to duplicate this scheme, okay, and I'm going to call this my Japanese scheme right here. And I'm going to change the Japanese scheme so that it is Japanese, and it's Japan here, but if it wasn't there, we could go look at it up here. Here's Japanese. And so now this is my locale, and this is my language. Okay? So now if I ever want to run in Japanese, now that I have this scheme, you see I have two schemes now. Now that I have this Japanese scheme, I can just hit run with this scheme selected, and it's going to run in Japanese. Let's go ahead and make this smaller. Even smaller, okay? So here's our app in Japanese, and maybe we type, oh, and so I'm trying to start a type. Notice in my locale, it's even bringing up a Japanese keyboard. I believe I can get an English keyboard here somehow. There we go. So let's go mad bum and log in. Here it is. Notice this is not translated at all. Notice this is not translated, okay, because we put those in our code. Those are not in our storyboard anyway. So we're part of the ways down making this internationalizable. We've got our storyboard. So let's take the next step, which is those strings, like the password, secure password, and I added one other feature to this app. I'll show you. Trying to just make this wide because it makes it a little bigger for you. Is if you type a bad username and password, it says login error, invalid username or password, try again. So this also needs to be localized to Japanese. Okay? So we got some strings here to work on. So let's go work on this string and that alert string. So you haven't seen this code in a while, but here's what it looks like. And I'll show you all the code I added. Very simple. I just added this, which is doing that last login thing. And I added this. If the logged in user couldn't be found, then I'm going to put up an alert. Okay, now that you know what alerts are, you didn't know what alerts were at the time that we wrote this, so I couldn't put it in, but now you certainly do. Okay, and then here's where we do that secured password thing. This is not changed from our last demo. So let's fix this one first. This is a pretty simple thing. We got these two literal strings here, and we need them to be localizable. So I'm just going to create a little local here, which I'm going to use NSLocalizeString for, and you can see here's that long version of it. And first let's do password. So I'm just going to take my literal string and plop it right in here. I don't need the table or bundle or value. Okay? And then this is going to be a comment to the localizer. This is something like, this is a prompt for the user's password when it is not secure, i.e. plain text. Okay, so I'm trying to give the localizer as much context there as I can. I might even put a much longer comment there. Okay, you really can't go wrong with nice long comments. And then the secured password, we will just do another NSLocalizeString here. We'll take this secured password thing out of here, put it here, get rid of all this. Okay, and we'll say prompt for an obscured, not plain text password. Okay? So that's it. So now these two locals here are just strings. If we look at their type, they're just a string, but they've had a chance to be localized by a translator. So now I can say if it's secure, return the secured password. If it's not secure, then do the password. Okay, simple as that. And you can put these things right in line right here if you want. Okay? We could have even put this, obviously, right here without even having this local, or I guess this right here, without having this local, but it's kind of nicer to put them in here. It starts getting a little hard to read if we had all that stuff here in a humongous line of code, but it's perfectly legal. One thing about these localized strings, these do need to be literals. Okay? This and this, they need to be literals. They can't be themselves variables. Okay? Because obviously the code is being scanned to extract this out of here. All right, how about our alert down here? Well, I'm going to do this a little differently. I'm going to put the strings into a little like constants. Okay, a struct that's kind of like constants. So I have my struct alert strings. I actually have a little struct inside of it called the alert strings for the login error alert, because I might have multiple alerts. And so then I have a localized string for the title of the alert, a localized string for the message in the alert, and a localized string for the dismiss button of the alert, right? Login error, invalid username, try again. And again, I put nice long description here so that the translator can figure out what the context of this is. And then down here, I need to replace these literal strings with the things from my struct. So this is the title. This is the message right here. Strings.loginerror.message. And here is our dismiss button. Okay, so I replaced that. Okay, so now I basically got all my strings except for this last login thing, which we're going to do in a second here. I pulled all my strings out into NSLocalizeString. I don't have any other literal strings other than this in my app that appear in the UI. So again, I'm going to go back to my project right here. And this time, I'm going to send out to my localizers again. Now this time when I send out, so this is going to the localizer again, so I'm going to send it out. I can replace these. If we look at what I sent this time to the localizer, let's look at Japanese, you can see that, look, the old things that that localizer did are in there. So that localizer hasn't lost any work. But down here is all the new things that we just added. Invalid username and password, login error, password, and here's my nice comments to tell them what it is. So they'll bring this up in their tool and they'll translate it. Okay? So you can see what I mean by we can go back and forth and back and forth. So they translate it and it comes back. So here we are from the translator. We'll say we did all of our languages. So let's go to a different language here. Let's do Chinese, let's say. Let's do traditional Chinese. Okay, so here's what Chinese looks like. Here, there's the storyboard. And here, all the literal strings have been translated. Okay, so let's import that. So I'm going to go here, import localizations from the localizer. This one, traditional, there it is. Again, I'll make another scheme here. Okay, this one I'm going to call Chinese traditional. Let's go ahead and run. We'll change this to Chinese, and we'll set our location to be China, our locale. Okay, so now we have one for Japan and one for China. Okay, so let's do this, and let's just run. Okay, again, I'll make this wider. So here we have in Chinese. Now, notice that this is working. Notice the auto layout is adjusting, just like it did in English. If we try to log in, we get our error right here. And some of you probably speak Chinese, so hopefully these translations are good. I take full responsibility. I don't know any Chinese, so I'll take responsibility if they're wrong, even though I didn't do the translations. Anyway, there's that. Now, if I log in, so let's log in here as Mad Bum. Okay, I still don't have this thing translated. And this is obviously content, so that we're not going to translate Madison Bumgarner. Okay, although we could, I suppose, but we're not going to. So this is content that's coming out of our database or whatever. So this is the last thing we need to do. Now, let's look at this last login. It's pretty bad. Okay, this is bad even in English. Okay, this is a really ugly looking time and date. I want this to be much nicer. I'm going to have it be last logged in certain number of days ago at this time. Okay, 12 and a half days ago at 4:15 or something like that. So if I do that, I need two things. I need to format that time, the time you logged in, and I also need to format the number, how many days ago you logged in. So I'm going to use a number formatter and a date formatter to make that work. Okay, and then I'm also going to use a format string, something with %this and then %that in there to do that. And that string, of course, as a whole is going to be localizable. So there's a lot going on to localize this here. But you're going to see the code's not too bad to do that. So let's go back to our controller. Here's where that nasty, offending, non-internationalized code is right here. Here, this is where I get the last login. So this is an NS date, right? This last login is an NS date of the last time this guy logged in. And so I don't really want this badness in here. So I really want to say something like last login %@ days ago at %@. So I'd really like to say something like that. And to do the format, I want to make sure that I'm doing string.localize string with format. Okay, so put this format string in here. Okay, and we need the arguments here that correspond, so we'll call that days ago and time. Those are the two arguments that correspond to here and here. But of course, this needs to itself be localized. Okay, so I'm going to call this last login format string. And we will put here let last login format string equal NS localized string. And then I'll put that format string in there. Again, I don't use this. And the comment here will say, what did I tell you here? Something like report the number of days ago and time that the user last logged in, or something along those lines to make sure that the localizer understands what's going on. Okay, so that's it. We've localized that. All we have to do now is the days ago and time. And these are both going to be strings, and we're going to get each of them by using a formatter. So let's start with the date. So I'm going to create a date formatter, NS date formatter. Okay, if you just create one, no arguments or whatever. And now we're going to configure this date formatter to present the date. So I'm going to set the time style of the thing to be kind of a short time. Okay, this is just saying when you last log in, I don't need the seconds and the time zone. I just need basically the time is a short time. So I'm going to say NS date formatter style dot short style. So you can see here's the styles: full style, long style, medium style. I'm going to go short style. Now I only want the time. I don't want the date portion at all. So I'm going to say date formatter dot date style equals NS date formatter style dot no style. Okay, that means don't give me the date portion. I just want the time. Okay? So now that I've kind of configured this date formatter, I can let that time string, this thing right here that I want this %@ sign to correspond to, I can say date formatter dot date from string, oh sorry, other way around, string from date, the last login. Okay, and that's it. So I've just used the date formatter. Now, not only is this going to put this in a nice format for me for English, it's also going to work in the local language, as you're going to see. All right, how about the number? This how many days ago? I said I only want it to be like 3.5. I don't want it to be logged in 3.5876 days ago. Okay, I could maybe just go for 3 days ago, but I'm going to say 3.1 decimal digits just to show you how to do that. So let's create a number formatter. And again, we already did this back in the calculator days. So we create this number for it. Then we're going to configure it. And the only thing I'm going to say is that I want the maximum number of fraction digits to be 1. Okay, 3.5, not 3.5267. Okay, just 1 digit. Then I'm going to let that days ago thing equal the number formatter string from number. And so now I just need to take this login date and turn it into the number of days ago, which I can do with last login dot time interval since now. Of course, that's negative, okay, because that's be in the past. And we'll just divide that times 60 times 60 times 24, which is the number of seconds in a day, because the time intervals are seconds. Okay? Make sense? All right. What do we got here? Oh. Exclamation point, yeah. So string from number is an optional. It returns an optional string. And you might say, why? Why would you ever do that? Because this argument, if it's a double, it's always going to be able to be turned into a string. But string from number also knows how to deal with things like Booleans and things like that from the old Objective-C days. So that's why it is. So you're pretty safe to always go ahead and unwrap the optional that gets back if what you're passing in here is a double or an int. Okay, or some number. Okay, you could do if let if you're a little worried about it, but you can do that. Okay, so there we go. Now we got the date and the time. And again, like I say, localizers will be able to change the order of these two things if the sentence in a different language makes sense to do that. All right, let's go back to our project again. Let's go ahead and export this. Okay, so we'll export this to localizer. Okay, replace all that. All right, we've sent them out there. Let's go take a quick look at what that looks like. We'll look at, let's look at French. Okay, so here's French. If we go down, here's the last login. Notice here's the $1 and $2. That's how they can control which one is which. And so they need to translate, though, this into French. Okay, so let's go ahead and have that happen. Okay, it happened. Okay, now let's load it in. Okay, import localizations from our localizer. Let's go ahead and let's do French. Okay, so let's edit a scheme here for French. I always like to do the edit schemes because you're always going to come back to it. It's not like, oh, you're only ever going to run French once. You're going to run it multiple times. So here's French, and we'll make it in France. Okay, so let's run. Let's see if we got this right. Oops. All right, so this all looks like French. Okay, that looks like in French. Okay, there's some French. I don't know if it's right French, but oh, again, my keyboard is French. So let's go ahead and bring up our keyboard so we can see that. Okay, yeah, we got our French keyboard here. So I'll type it here. Madboum. Oops, Madboum. How do I back up? There we go, Madboum. And here we go, foo. Hopefully I typed that right, but there we go. All right, so there's Madboum. And you can see dernière connexion, il y a 10 heures, 7 jours, whatever. Okay, so there's the time and date. And you can see it's put a comma there. Okay, not 10.7, but 10.7. It's like those French have a different word for everything. But they also have a different way to put the number there. Okay, so there's French. Now I'm going to show you one other language, which is kind of a fun, different, interesting language, which is Arabic. So let's go ahead and import Arabic. Now, those of you who know anything about languages will know why this is an interesting language. So let's duplicate it. Arabic. And okay, it's Arabic. We'll have the country. We'll have it be Egypt. Let's speak Arabic in Egypt. Close. Okay, so now let's run this in Arabic. And whoa, it broke my UI. Look at that. I put those things over on the right side. And what's going on here? Oh, this changed securities on the wrong side. This is supposed to be over here. Okay, so Arabic is a right to left language, right? The text flows from the right-hand side of the page to the left, not from left to right. So not only does that mean the text needs to flow right to left, but my whole UI needs to flow right to left, okay? So labels need to be on the right, okay, with the text going to the left. Same thing with these buttons, okay? They need to go for right and left. So this is in here. I have an English keyboard, so it's going to be left to right typing here. But if I had an Arabic keyboard, it would be typing right to left. So let's go ahead and log in. That's this one, not this one. There it is. And here's our last login, whatever that is in Arabic. And here's the time in Arabic. Okay, from right to left. So it's all right to left. Okay, even this got made right to left. Okay, and that happened automatically. Notice I did absolutely nothing whatsoever in my entire storyboard to make that happen. But if we look at our constraints, like if we look at this constraint right here, this guy, let's look at his constraints. You see it's trailing space to superview, trailing space, not right edge to superview, trailing space. Okay, so that's just saying that we want to be attached to the trailing edge. And if we're in a right to left language, that means the other side. So this auto layout did the right thing. It attached this edge over to here because this is the trailing edge. Everyone understand that? Okay, so when you go and do a right to left language, probably when you run, it's not going to work as nice as this one was. I was actually very pleased that it just worked, okay? But sometimes it'll be like, oh, oops, I made an assumption there that it was always going to be left to right, something smashing into each other. So I really always strongly recommend doing at least one right to left language, Hebrew or Arabic or something that tests out that part of your user interface. Okay? So that's it for localization. Pretty powerful system, pretty easy really for you. Apple's made it actually quite easy for you. For the translators, depends. Sometimes it's easy for them. Sometimes it's a pain in the neck trying to figure out what it is you're actually trying to say to them about where this word appears. You'll get some funny translation back sometime when they don't really understand what it is you're saying. But the underlying system is pretty easy to iterate with them. Okay, any questions about localization? Okay, let's go back to our slides. Oops, slides are here. All right. Okay, so the next topic is settings. All right, so the settings is a, let's go back here and let's show this on here. Okay, so the settings app, every device has a settings app. It's this little icon right here. Okay, see that icon right there? So I'm going to click on that, and this gives settings for the whole device. Okay, earlier we were looking, for example, inside general, so that we could find the language and region and all that. But there's more than general settings here. There's also application-specific settings. You see them right here, mail, notes, reminders, phone. Those are settings for those apps, okay? And even all the way down at the bottom here, okay, there's one of our apps that has setting. Tracks, I don't ever remember doing any settings for Tracks, but that's because Tracks used Photos library, it used the camera, etc. And so it had some settings that were automatically built into it, okay? But what we're going to do today is add settings specific to our app that we have, some setting that's just only our app has that setting. And how do we put the UI in this settings, general settings app right here, okay? So on the slide here you can see some examples of some apps that have settings, Maps and Safari, have lots of settings, etc. The settings, you're going to build this UI using something like info.plist. Okay, so it's not exactly going to build this in your storyboard. Okay, it's very restricted. You can only do a few things, but you can build surprisingly a lot of stuff here with switches and sliders and text fields. But anything that's set in this UI is communicated to your app via NSUser defaults. Okay, so basically this UI in the settings app is just setting NSUser defaults in your app. That's what it's doing. Okay, so let's look and see how it works. You add a little settings bundle to your app. That's how you get it to display some UI. And you do that just by saying new file, and you go to this place here, iOS resource, and inside there you'll see settings bundle. Okay, you pick settings bundle, and you're going to get a sample settings bundle. This is the best thing for something that's barely supported, it seems like in some ways. This was the best thing they did was they just gave you a sample one. Okay, and the sample one, at least as of this lecture, that they give you has a little grouping there with the text field, a little switch, and a slider. And if you open up inside the settings bundle, there's this little file in there called root.plist, as you'll see. And it's just a bunch of properties, a property list, and that's describing what's in there. So let's look at this thing on the right, the UI, and what's corresponding on the left. So look at on the left where it says item 0 group at the top. See, that's making that little group, the gray group things. This is basically a static table view, and it's basically that is basically causing a static table view section to be created, and that's the title of it, group. And then see item 1, text field name. That's got things that describe what that text field is, and it's not just the title of the text field, which is name, but it's also things like what's the default value and what kind of keyboard should I bring up? A URL keyboard or just a normal alphabetic keyboard or whatever. Then you see item 2, toggle switch, right? It's got the toggle switch there. Item 3 is the slider. You got the slider. Slider, very limited. You can specify an image on the left and an image on the right. Okay, that's the only thing you can kind of customize about the slider. So if you had a minimum, maximum value, you have to do it with images. It is localizable. I'll talk about that in a second. And if you look in all of them, see number 1, 2, and 3, they have a line there, identifier. You see in item 1, it's called name preference. In item 2, it's called enabled preference. And in item 3, it's called slider preference. That is the name of the NSUser default that this is going to be set to. Okay? So every time that slider moves, it's going to update the slider underbar preference NSUser default in this app. Okay? So pretty straightforward and simple, actually. Localization is a pain in the neck for settings, okay? Because the xlif stuff doesn't work with it. You have to do it all manually. You essentially create these directories inside the setting bundle called 2-letter code for the language .lproj. And inside there, you're going to put a strings file for each page of your settings UI. Now, in the previous one, we just saw one page, but it's actually possible to click and transition to another page of settings. Okay? You see this in a lot of settings. That's where they're kind of going down multiple levels. So you can do that. And so for every level, you got to have a strings file. The strings file looks like this. And you have to send these off to your translator, and they have to translate them as well, in addition to the xlifs. So this is a pain. I'm sure Apple eventually will integrate into the xlif system. However, it's a little bit showing you that settings is not a primary user interface for your app. You really want to use it sparingly. You don't want people to have to go to settings unless you know, they're setting something that's really going to be set once and maybe never changed again, okay? Or something that they set and then it only changed in the future because something big happens. Like in mail, you set your accounts up once. And they only change if you decide not to use that email account or you change your password, maybe you have to go back in there. That makes sense for that to not be in the main user interface of mail, be off in settings, okay? But you do not want to have the normal use of your app require them to be going to settings all the time, okay? If you have a setting that people are setting constantly, you should have UI in your normal app for it, okay? This is just UI that you want to kind of get out of the way of your main UI because people aren't going there very much. All right, so that's what settings is about. So I'm going to do a demo with settings, but since I won't come back to the slides, we'll talk about what's coming up here. Wednesday is the alternate final. As you know, I need your slides today if you want to present at that alternate final. No section on Friday, but your final project is due, 11:59 and 59 seconds on Friday night, okay, Pacific time. Saturday, your slides are due by midnight, okay? Please make your slides 1280 by 720, okay? In other words, widescreen format. Do not give me those 1024 by 768s or 640 by 480, okay? Widescreen, just like this, like you see right here, because it's going to be projected right here, just like this, okay? I prefer Keynote. If you can do Keynote, please do Keynote, because what you see in Keynote is what I'm going to get and what everyone's going to get when I put it on screen. If you send me a PowerPoint, Keynote is really good at opening up PowerPoints, but if you have a weird font in there, it might get turned into Helvetica or something, and then it looks like a mess. Okay, so if you can do Keynote, please do. I understand not everyone has a Mac with Keynote, totally understandable. So PowerPoint I will accept, but please, if you can do Keynote. And then next week, normal exam period, I believe it's Thursday of finals week, 12:15 to 3:15. That's, if anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's when it is. Then we will do the presentations. There's so many of you. This is the largest enrollment we've ever had, so you only get 90 seconds each. I know that sounds tight. If we have a lot of people go on Wednesday, maybe I'll try and give you an extra 10 seconds or something like that. But if you just do the math, 100 people, 3 hours, especially with the time to transition, walk up and down, and technical problems, we really can't give you more than that, unfortunately. Okay? Any questions before I do this last demo? We'll be done for today. Okay. So the way I'm going to do the settings bundle is I'm going to add a setting to Bouncer. Remember Bouncer? Thing bouncing, square bouncing around. I'm going to make it so that Bouncer, we can set its elasticity in settings. Now, elasticity is probably not something you're going to be setting a lot in Bouncer. You kind of want to set it to the way you like Bouncer to happen, and you're just going to leave it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So let's go back to Bouncer. Here's Bouncer, as we left it off last time. I'm going to run Bouncer here just so that we can remind ourselves what it looks like. All right, so Bouncer. Remember, this thing just bounces off the walls, and you know it's pretty bouncy. It's not super bouncy, but you know, if I take it up to the top and I just let it fall down, you know, it bounces about halfway back up. Okay, slowly bouncing less and less. And that's because we set the elasticity in Bouncer over here to be 0.85. So it's not full bouncing, okay? It's 85% bouncing. So it's losing energy with each collision, but not too bad. So this is the thing that we're going to have set in settings. Instead of being 0.85 all the time, we're going to set it in settings. So let's just add a settings bundle to our app. So we go New File. We go iOS Resource. Here's Settings Bundle right here. Just double click. What do you want to call it? We'll call it Settings. That's what people usually call their settings bundles. And here it is, our settings bundle right here. If you click on the bundle itself, you just get this little Lego brick. But if you go down here to root.plist, you will see here is the ones, that default one I was showing you in the slide, that it gives you. And here is the strings that go along with this plist file. This is what you would send off to your localizer right here for this particular plist file. So we're going to run just to see this UI, which has got a group with a text field and a toggle switch and a slider. We're going to see that in our settings app. So this is run. Now every time you run, it installs the settings bundle into your system. So here we go. We have this thing. It's 0.85. So let's go over to settings. Actually, let's make our live a little easier here, a little less swapping around. Let's put bouncer on this page. Okay. So let's go to settings. And now when we go down to settings, see, we got bouncer. Okay. It added things for bouncer. And if we click on bouncer, there it is, that name field right here, and the enabled, and this slider. Okay. So that's a good start. Now let's change this UI right here to be what we want, which is we just really want a slider for elasticity. So I'm going to keep this group at the top, but instead of calling it group, I'm going to call it elasticity. Elasticity. Okay? And I don't need the text field. We're not typing any text field. So you can delete things by just hitting backspace to delete. Same thing, toggle switch, delete. I don't want that. But I do want the slider. I'm going to have the default value be the 0.85 that we have now. Let's say the maximum is about 1.1. If we start getting to more than 1.1, in other words, when it bounces off, it gains energy, that thing's going to be ripping around so fast. So that's the maximum we want to allow. And the minimum, we really don't want 0. That would mean just death. So let's make it like 0.5, which is pretty dampened, but not complete death when it hits something. Okay? And then I don't really like this as my NS user default name. I'm going to call it, how about bouncer behavior, since that's the class that we're going to be setting this in, dot elasticity. Okay, it's just kind of a decent name. Okay, kind of a namespaced name. Okay, so now we're going to get a slider with elasticity as the name of the group. So let's take a look at that. All right, so we go back here to settings, and we look at bouncer. Here it is, elasticity, and we've got this nice slider. Now as I move this slider, it is changing that NS user default from 1.1 all the way down to 0.5. Okay, 1.1, 0.5, and everywhere in between. Okay, now it's only setting the NS user default at this point. We're not actually looking at the value. So when we go back, here to bouncer, it's still bouncing along at 0.85, no matter what I set that to. Okay? So now we need to look at the NS user default and have it change the elasticity. So we can do that right here, nice and wide. Instead of 0.85, I'm going to say NS user defaults, standard user defaults, double for key, and we called it bouncer. Again, I should probably have a nice constant for this, but we'll type it in for speed here. Bouncer behavior elasticity. Now this is a double, and of course elasticity here is a CG float, so we need to put that in a CG float. Okay, and so that's good. So let's go ahead and now see what happens. Okay, so it looks like we have low elasticity. See how it's barely bouncing? Okay, and so let's go look and see what our elasticity is set to. Bouncer, right in the middle. So let's set it to high elasticity and go back and see if that'll work. So we got to bouncer and, oh, it's still low. Well, what's going on? Okay, why didn't that pick that up? That's because we only call this once when our app starts. So whatever the elasticity was in the settings at the time our app launched, that's what we get. And if the user goes and changes it, it makes no difference. So how do we make it so that the user can go to settings, change elasticity, and come back, and it'll be different in Bouncer without quitting and restarting Bouncer and all that stuff? Well, the answer to that is notifications. There's an NS notification you get every time your NS user defaults change. Okay, it's pretty cool. So let's go NS notification center, default center, add observer for name. The name is NS user defaults did change, as you might imagine. Okay, the object is, I don't care, anybody can send me that. The queue, we'll just do the main queue. And using block, this is what's going to happen when things change. And I'm actually going to do our closing or trailing closure notation here. So here's the notification that's getting passed to me. I'm actually don't even need to look at that. And inside here, I'm just going to do this. Okay? So every time my NS user defaults change, I'm just going to update the elasticity. Okay? Now really, to be a good citizen here, I should be doing let observer equals, and somewhere else I should be doing ns notification default center remove observer, this thing. But the way our app is right now, pretty much bouncer comes up, takes over the screen, and never leaves. So it's probably okay to not be doing that here. Besides, it's a demo, so we're not going to do it. But generally, when you add an observer, you want to get that observer cookie back, and you want to remove it somewhere sensible. All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, now last time we changed the elasticity to 1.1, I think. Right, see, so look, this guy's going to go pretty wild. Okay, he's gaining speed with every bounce. So let's slow him down. Let's go over into settings and have our, notice that every time you install it, it's going to reinstall it here. So let's change our elasticity from 1.1 down to really slow. Okay, now we can go back to bouncer, and the next time bouncer hits, it slows down. Okay, see that? Almost dead. Very little bounce. Let's go back and change it again. Go all the way back up to, whoops, up to high speed. Enter. Okay, and the next hit, it's gaining energy. Oh yeah, gaining more and more speed with every bounce. Okay, there we go. I don't even need to touch it. Look. Okay, and it's bounced already just disappeared. Went to some ether. Okay, that is it. I finished early for once today, so thank you all for coming, and I'll be here if you have any questions.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.